What's up, everybody? It's Goddess Z, and I'm here with another podcast episode on holistic and spiritual AF. Welcome back, fam. I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The podcast is growing. We are growing, and that is all because of you guys showing up and always, listening to the podcast episodes, dropping your comments. I appreciate that. And if this is your first time landing on this podcast episode, you are definitely in the right spot. If you like hearing topics such as how to connect with your ancestors, how to activate your divine feminine codes, esoteric wisdom, metaphysics, we talk about all of those sorts of things. Okay. On the first and the third Friday of the month, I have guests come in, share their wisdom, their expertise. And then on the second and the fourth Fridays of the month, I come in with my downloads, my transmissions, just whatever comes through me throughout the week and over the past couple of months. And so, with that being said, make sure you are following me. This podcast is aired on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, pretty much anywhere that podcasts are syndicated. We are out there now, okay? And then, of course, if you want to dive into a little deeper what it is that I do, because a podcast is just an extension of Holistic and Spiritual AF, be sure to check out the website holisticandspiritualaf.com, okay? All this information will be down inside of the description, as well as how you can find me all over social media. Okay, y'all, that's a record. That was a minute and 30 seconds. Okay, I got all that out. Okay, I wish I could like repeat and do that again. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Today is episode 78, Dating as a Divine Feminine. Stop shrinking for partnership. Okay, all right, ladies, we going in on this one because I don't know why I haven't done this one yet. I just was like, going in thinking about some topics that we can actually start to talk about. And I actually pulled together a list, a pretty solid list. Okay. So make sure y'all tune in, okay? Because it's definitely gonna be popping on the solo episodes just as much as the partner episodes. All right. So today we're talking about dating as a divine feminine, stop shrinking for partnership. And that's a discussion and a conversation I think that needs to be had because a lot of us have done the work. Regardless of where you are on your healing path, you are different from where you were when you started. Okay. So some of the types of relationships and situationships that we would have entertained before are just not fitting. And for a lot of us, we have been single for a long time, or for quite some time, and not miserably single, single by a choice, etc. But at the same time, we still want to be able to experience companionship, partnership, have our emotional needs met. Being a divine feminine does not mean that we don't have those feminine tendencies where we would like a partner that can, fulfill or match or partner with us on that level. So that's why I wanted to do this episode because I wanted to talk about the different aspects of dating as a divine feminine because I don't hear that one too much. Okay. I really don't. But there's a lot to kind of go into when it comes to that because the bottom line is like I said, you done put in the work, so we shouldn't have to go back and settle or shrink ourselves. Okay, and that we're going to talk about a little later in the podcast episode, and I will share some of my experiences when it comes to that as well, because definitely there is a lot of them, and I know that you ladies can relate as well. Once you start elevating, raising your frequency, stepping into your divine feminine, activating those codes, there's people, not necessarily romantic and intimate partnerships alone, but actual just people, period, that always want to try to shrink you and reduce you and put you back in a box, get you back behind the fence. So we're going to talk about that today. So, if you know me, I love to kind of break down a definition before we start diving into things so that it all kind of settles and integrates a little bit better inside of the spirit, and it makes more sense. And of course, everything I do from an Afro-Indigenous perspective. Okay. And I work primarily with Afro-Indigenous women. That's Indigenous women of the Americas, Afro-Indigenous Caribbean women. I work with us mainly. And so, that's why it makes sense to kind of take things from that perspective. A lot of times I'll do the Western definition as well as ours, and you can usually see the disparity in between the two. But for today, we're going to just go into the Afro Indigenous perspective of a sovereign woman, and then we're going to break down divine feminine. Okay, now, sovereign is one of these words that have been thrown around recently. I want to say probably in the last year. And I know it's coming straight from ChatGPT, all right? Because ChatGPT was like, everybody started using sovereign. And I was like, okay, like there's got to be everybody using ChatGPT, which is nothing wrong with that. It still has a place. And a lot of times we have to come up with these words in order for us to be able to understand them. But a lot of times, as you'll understand, you'll realize once I read these definitions off, we were already doing this. Okay, there's an embodiment aspect of sovereignty that is like you just are that. You know what I'm saying? You just become that, and you just live that way, and you embody that, like it exudes out of you, out of your essence and your frequency. So keep that in mind when we're talking about a sovereign woman. Okay, now from an Afro-Indigenous perspective, because you're not going to really be able to find anywhere in any kind of African or indigenous traditions, the word sovereign. Okay. Like I said, this is a chat GPT thing that just came out recently. So just keep that in mind. But in many African and indigenous traditions, sovereignty is not just independence, it's self-governance, aligned with community, ancestors, and spirit. A sovereign woman is a woman who governs her life through discernment and spiritual alignment, honors the wisdom of her ancestors and lineage, protects her energy, body, and emotional space, chooses relationships that support collective growth and harmony. Sovereignty does not mean isolation. All right. So traditionally, African and indigenous societies view sovereignty as balanced power within relationship, not domination or submission. A sovereign woman knows who she is and refuses to abandon herself to be accepted. So, in an Afro Indigenous sense, sovereignty is not just about independence, it's about alignment with spirit, ancestors, and your own internal authority. Okay. So, once again, a very brilliant way of breaking that down from an Afro Indigenous perspective. But as you can see, it encompasses quite a few things that would have to be embodied. Like you have to be that. There's not no one word or one sentence that could kind of describe that. It's basically, like I said, you're living in alignment with your internal authority. And I actually did an episode. On this way back, maybe about 10, 12 episodes back, so check it out. It was, I forget the name of it, but just check it out. You'll be able to find it because it's got sovereign in the title. So now I want to move on to the divine feminine, because we're hearing a lot about that too as we rise back into the energy of the divine feminine, coming from this patriarchal construct that we have been subjected to. All right. So, divine feminine, before colonial patriarchy reshaped gender dynamics, many African and indigenous cultures understood feminine power as sacred, creative, and authoritative. The divine feminine represents life giving energy, intuition, and emotional intelligence, nurturing and protection of community, creative and spiritual authority. And some examples would include the Yoruba priestesses and diviners, queen mothers in Akan societies, indigenous clan mothers who held political influence. The divine feminine was never meant to be positive or submissive. She is receptive but discerning, okay? So the divine feminine is not weak energy. In many ancestral cultures, feminine energy carried spiritual authority, wisdom, and leadership within the community. All right. So that's very important to understand that divine feminine energy. And I'm going to go ahead and put some of the historical examples. Can be your grandmother, can be your great grandmother, could be your mother. Okay. So there's these women who are exhibiting these characteristics of a divine feminine, and they are like the matriarchs of the community, of the family. And then some of them also held political influence before we started to move into this patriarchal construct that we're in today. So, as a divine feminine or a woman who's activating these codes, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You tapping into these life giving energy that comes from our womb, your intuition, your emotional intelligence, your creative, your spiritual authority. You have activated quite a bit of these things, which places you in a different category, okay, when it comes to dating. And it places you in a category that it's not that easy to just kind of, mess around with just anybody. Let's keep it what it is, all right? So being sovereign does not mean you don't want partnership. We already talked about that. Humans are relational beings. Even African and indigenous traditions emphasize community and partnership, not isolation, all right? But sovereignty means I choose partnership from alignment, not from fear of being alone. All right. And that's why some of us are very comfortably alone, because we recognize that our peace is sovereign. We recognize that having our peace is essential and crucial to us being able to be tuned into the spirit realm, connected to our ancestors. That's another thing that we have. We're connected to our ancestors and our spirit team, so we're able to have more discernment when it comes to certain people. Period. All right. So if a person's not for us, we're okay with that. But at the same time, that being said, it doesn't mean that we have to like heal ourselves, elevate, be the matriarchs and all these things and still be alone. All right. So I wanted to kind of do this episode because of that. All right. So I want to talk about the problem that healed women run into. And I'm probably going to be sharing a little bit of my experience in this part. All right. So many of the women have healed faster than the dating pool evolved. Oh my gosh. And I talk about my story all the time. I talk about being on my journey now for 22 years. Okay. So I started right at the top of my 20s and whatever. I had a whole lot of healing and a whole lot of trauma to do, you know what I'm saying? At the time I was married or I was about to get married. And then I ended up being a widow, like, about the last almost 16 years, right? So that first part there wasn't anything to worry about as far as dating because I already had somebody. But that second half, child, please, like the more that I healed, the more that I grew, some of these people would be there just for a hot little minute, okay? Because I would grow, I would evolve, they would not, and then we would go our separate ways. And then I would meet somebody else, and they would, same thing would happen over and over until I had gotten to a place where I was comfortable like just waiting like you know what I'm saying, was trying to find something that's more in alignment because I recognize that my peace was more important. And I also realized that a lot of times I would get distracted with these things and these relationships that were just not in alignment, and it would pull me off of my spiritual practices, my connection to my ancestors. I wasn't listening to them. I was more trying to fulfill the physical side of my needs, right? My spiritual needs were being left out. Okay. So um what ended up happening is like I just said, I healed faster than the dating pool evolved. All right. So I've confronted trauma. A lot of us have. We've done emotional work. We've developed self-awareness, but then we keep encountering these guys or these partners that are the opposite. They avoid emotional availability. They fear commitment. Okay. Still operating from patriarchal conditioning. That is a big thing to talk about, particularly when we were talking about melanated men. A lot of them still carry the idea of patriarchy and don't even realize it. They feel that a certain type of way to be masculine is the right way, when a lot of times it comes across as toxic masculinity, and they are not in a position or equipped to be able to handle an embodied divine feminine because they feel like she's not in her place. This is what we're talking about going around to that shrinking topic, right? They feel like she should be down here somewhere and submissive. Then all of a sudden they want to go to scriptures, you know what I'm saying? They weren't trying to go to scriptures and do scripture nothing before, but now all of a sudden you supposed to honor thy man and all of this stuff, and it's just not the way that originally things were. Like I just described in those definitions up there, women were equals. The divine feminine and the divine masculine were counterparts. They were partners. Okay, there wasn't one above the other. Each had their own functioning. So yeah, you start to run into a lot of this, or at least I know I have, and I know that somebody listening to this also has as well. And so they're also intimidated, like I said, by self possessed women. And so let's be honest, the number of truly self aware divine masculine men is smaller than the women doing the work. And those of us who've done the work, we know this. I'm starting to see way more brothers than I used to actually doing this work. But for the most part, a lot of us, there's always more of us. There's always more classes for us. There's more things that we are doing as women than the men are. The men are starting to heal, and I love to see that. I love when they have like these men and boy types of retreats where they can really start to heal and they can really start to open up and start to have some self-awareness and emotional availability. And it's a beautiful thing because they need that, just as much as we do. But the bottom line is we have been doing, there's more of us that have been doing it than the men, all right? So that's going to make that dating pool even smaller of a match, right? So that is kind of the problem that healed women run into, is basically finding the men that are divine masculine and have gone through their work and can match you and are not intimidated by your self-possession and your self-awareness, and your power. Let's just go ahead and call it what it is, because once you start healing and you start activating these divine feminine codes, you start accessing power, like straight up power. Okay. And that's just a lot of times too much for somebody who hasn't done the work, for a partner who hasn't done the work. So now I want to talk about the sinking trap. All right. The shrinking trap. I'm sorry. So a lot of times what happens, and I've done this, I'm not going to say that I haven't done this. Like I said, in the beginning, I was trying to feel that physical part of myself. I was lonely. I was isolated. I want somebody to talk to. I want somebody to Netflix and chill. I want to go on a date sometimes, you know? And so I would shrink myself, you know, I would shrink my abilities and the capability and capacity of me to make somebody else more comfortable. All right. So, what does shrinking actually look like? And you may want to kind of gauge yourself, since it's just you listening to this. You know what I'm saying? So, you can kind of be honest with yourself and say, have I done this? Am I doing this? Okay. And then, of course, I always talk about your intuition, your ancestors, your spirit guides. You know, you know if you're doing these things. You know if your spirit feels off about something. All right. So that's the whole purpose of this episode, is like, you know, we're hitting different angles of it for people in different places of it. So shrinking can look like downplaying your intelligence. Ooh wee. Okay. I'm talking about every last one of these. Minimizing your success. All right. Tolerating poor communication. What? That means that you can't even hold a conversation. Like, you can't even talk about and communicate your issues without having a 2 year old, 5 year old tantrum. All right. And you just start tolerating that crap, right? Avoiding expressing needs. That goes back to communication. You should be, a divine masculine should be able to express his needs. Okay. He should be able to communicate his needs in a healthy manner if there's been some healing done. So, over functioning in relationships. All right. And why do we do this? Because women are still socially conditioned to believe that you are too much. And if you're too much, you're going to end up alone. But the truth is, shrinking might get you a partner, but it'll never get you a healthy partnership. And remember that, okay? And this right here is loaded and it's deep. And I think a lot of it comes from what we saw. Um, from the women in our families. And we have to realize that as things changed and progressed, um, and we started to do more healing thanks to the ancestors that came before us and the ones who are still living today, who had to go through a lot of the harder stuff, and they really had to take what they could get, you know, because society was set up in a different way, and it was very much heavily a patriarchal construct. Okay. There was a part and point in time when women couldn't even vote. All right. There was a point in time when women couldn't do a lot of things, right? Even white women. All right. So there was a long process in between there. So you think about people like my grandmother, who was born in the Jim Crow era, and she got married to my grandfather, who got her pregnant. She was never with another man. You know what I'm saying? And then some people, you know, they looked at you, and I still get that from my family sometimes. They'd be like, "You're so pretty. You know, why are you single?" Like, and I'm like, "Because I like my peace, bro." Like, I have heard what you guys have gone through, and it just doesn't seem like it was worth it just to say you got a man, you know. But I have that opportunity today because they went through what they went through, and I recognize that. So I don't brag about that, but I let them know that I'm happy and I'm okay, you know, and I'm good where I'm at, because what I have is a sense of freedom, a freedom and knowledge of self, and me being able to be 100% who I am, you know, the soul returned. And that's something that I couldn't have gotten with a partner who was going to shrink me. Now, I wanted to share my experience on this because I've gone through every last one of these. Downplaying your intelligence, right? I'm a highly intelligent woman, and I know a lot of different things about a lot of different subjects because I've researched a lot, I've learned a lot, I've had a lot of experience with different types of things, and I've also activated a lot of things in my DNA that goes back to other lifetimes and ancestral DNA. So it would seem like I know a lot, you know, to some people. Now, I don't run around telling everybody everything I know, but if I'm in a relationship with you and we're partners, you're going to hear a lot of my stuff because I consider myself to be a bit of a nerd. You know, there's things I like to have be mentally stimulated, right? And so I'm talking about a lot of different things, and I've experienced partners that want to downplay my intelligence. You don't know everything, you know. You need to be humble. You know, that's my cue right there. Like, if you start telling me that I need to be humble, then I'm out because I already know what it is. And I also know the definition of humility. And see, that's another thing why I like to do definitions and break down words, because a lot of times people throw these words out here and they're spells. They're casting spells over you and they're meant to. And then they'll hide behind, oh, I didn't mean that. That's not what I meant when I said that. Well, damn it, you got to be careful about what you say, because these words are damaging and they're curses, and I won't let you put curses over my life, right? So downplaying intelligence, now you have to gauge how much of that you're willing to put up with. And a lot of times, sometimes I will check. Everybody's allowed to have a bad day. Everybody's allowed to be under a lot of pressure and just be a little irritated and short and snappy. But how often is that happening? And I got to be honest about that too. It's like the first time that happened, how did I feel on the inside? How often is this happening? Is this person getting away with something else? And then next thing you know, coming up with that narcissistic behavior of, what are you talking about? Like, that's not what I meant. All of those types of things. This is not signs of a healthy, healed, divine masculine. Okay. This is not somebody who's going to be able to tolerate a divine feminine. Like, and I had to go through my things in order to learn that, right? Minimizing success. Here we go with that again. That's all of these go into each other, if you ask me. I've got a lot of things going on in my life, and that's one of the things I love about where I'm at today, is because um, I've got some major shifts happening in my life, right? And I'm keeping those close to my heart. This is like me going through stuff with my spirit guides and my ancestors. We know what's going on, and I don't have no outside influence. I don't have any distractions on that, right? I don't have anybody telling me, oh, maybe you shouldn't try to do so much. That's another one. You're trying to do too much. It's just listen to the tone that people are using. They'll let you know. Next thing you know, you start shrinking a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And now all of a sudden, this stuff is tolerable. All right. Communication is a big one for me. As you can already tell, I talk a lot. I like to talk things through. I would prefer to know what's going on with you than to assume. So if you can't even communicate properly, there's definitely some healing work there, because you should be able to communicate and express your needs, your wants, and your desires in a very mature manner. Okay. So if you can't do that, you start yelling and lashing out. And now you talk about something when something else happened that ain't got nothing to do with that. Like, yeah, those types of things, I'm not shrinking. Like, I'm not shrinking. And over functioning in relationships. Now, this one's a tricky one because I used to do this a lot. Okay. And I realized that that's that matriarchal tendency. That's that tendency that we have to take care of everybody, particularly as Black women in the Americas. With our job, we just used to doing that. We're used to seeing that. We're used to taking care of the kids, taking care of the husband, taking care of the house, taking care of stuff at work, taking care of everything. We will make sure everybody okay. And a lot of times, what can end up happening is we end up over functioning in relationships, not necessarily by doing everything, but also doing a lot of the emotional lifting. All right. So you got somebody who you got to pry information and feelings out of. You got somebody who you got to try to push to be the best they can be, but you're not getting that reciprocation. So it's not an even partnership at that point. And what's happening is you're over functioning. You're over functioning. You're trying to make this relationship work. This other person is just kind of sitting there and just like absorbing and taking and not reciprocating in the energy. That doesn't work for a divine feminine. Now, that may work for somebody else, but I'm telling you, that's going to drain and deplete you of your essence until you have nothing for yourself. And now all of a sudden, who's going to rebuild you? Now you're going to have to rebuild again, right? So that's what we mean by shrinking. But like I said, some of these things may be happening, and you're trying to figure out whether or not you should stay or go, and that's totally going to be up to you. But like I said, I would say check in with your internal team. That's why I say I have a spiritual council about all kind of stuff. When stuff feel off, then I go to my ancestors, I go to my spirit guides, I go to divination, I go to meditation, I go to receive the answers, and whether it's something I want to hear or not, most of the time I already knew it anyway, because by the time my spirit gets to a point where I'm feeling like something's off. You know what I'm saying? It is, you know, and I've been doing this long enough to know that. And that's the beautiful part about it. And so then I have to sit there and say to myself, what is it that I really want? Do I want to stay in a shrinking partnership just to say I'm in a partnership, or do I want a healthy partnership that allows us to be able to elevate and grow? without one person relying and depending on the other too much, right? But it takes some work to get there. Like, you know what I'm saying? So a lot of times if we are exhibiting those shrinking behaviors, then it allows us to be able to see there's some healing necessary. You know, there's never any kind of right or wrong. Really, it's a way for us to do more shadow work. You know, this is a perfect example of shadow work because shadow work isn't what everybody always thinks it is. A lot of times, you know, once we've healed certain things, then we go to another phase of the healing journey and we have an experience that's going to actually show us why we need more work in that area. Because we could think, oh, wow, yeah, you know, I really did heal that because we're a lot better than we were when we first started. But then there's still remnants and patterns there. And that's where shadow work comes in and we get to integrate later, you know, what it is that we learn into the next experience, right? All of it's on the goal to a healthy partnership. And a lot of that also is breaking generational curses. For some of us who have come from families where there was toxic relationships, and them relationships was like them two people had no business ever being together. They've been married for 20, 30 years. They got kids together, and it's like, and they beat the hell out of each other and all kind of crazy stuff. Us being able to get to a place to be able to have a healthy partnership is also creating new generational patterns for the new generation to see. Now, the new generation has a different idea of what a partnership should look like, a healthy idea, a healed idea, one where there's mutual affection, understanding, care. And reciprocation. One person isn't doing more than the other or too much. You know, there's a partnership. You know, even if one person does all of this and the other one does all of that, it's still a partnership and it works in their partnership. And so I think that's a big word as well to that should be used is partnership. Just think about that. You know, is this good person a good partner or am I over functioning? All right. So now I want to get into dating as a sovereign divine feminine woman. All right. This is actually like the empowerment portion, right? Because I know some of y'all was like, so what, we not supposed to date? And that's not true, because ain't nothing wrong with going to date, honey, and having a good time. And like I said, tapping into some of those human relational needs that we all have. I'm somebody who's constantly on, whether it's like on, functioning in my business or whether it's on, being on the spiritual side of things. So sometimes I want to just be able to relax and enjoy company with somebody. And I don't have to shrink to do it. I don't have to give you my divine feminine codes either. You know what I'm saying? And I don't have to pick just any old damn body for the sake of it. All right. So that's what we're talking about in this next section is dating as a divine feminine. All right. So number one, the step one that you want to think about is know your lineage and your healing. Okay. So for before dating intentionally, a sovereign woman needs to ask herself, what wounds have I healed? What patterns did I inherit from my family or lineage? We talked about that before. And what relationship models did I grow up seeing? Right? Afro-Indigenous traditions emphasize that healing is ancestral work, not just personal therapy. All right. I got another episode on that as well, where we really went in on that. It was great. Healing is ancestral technology. So you're not just dating as an individual, you're dating with the lineage behind you. Do you know? So my ancestors definitely be having something to say about people. They do. My matriarchal lineage, they be like, mm-mm, you already know that ain't gonna work. They will say something. And I know that's the thing. It's like I said, having my aunties and my grandmamas there, ushering me and guiding me through life so I don't mess up too much. And like I talk about all the time, most of the time my ancestors are protecting me from me because, I'll go out there and do something reckless, but because I have my lineage, behind me and with me all the time. Um, I think about these things for real. Like, if I'm being honest with myself, and if you have already activated certain codes inside of yourself as a divine feminine, you know this stuff. Like I said, you spend a lot more time in your internal realm, a lot more introspection, a lot more internal inside out living. So when you sitting there, waiting at a red light and all of a sudden you thinking about you want to start dating again, or maybe you're going to see this guy. Should I give this guy a chance or whatever? You got to think about it. What wounds have you actually healed? What are your patterns previously with dating and relationships? How does that tie into what you saw growing up? And what patterns did you inherit? The same thing. And then What don't you want? Like, you know what I'm saying? What is it that you know you don't want? Like, one thing I know I don't tolerate, and I think it's directly tied to what I saw, in relationships growing up, is I don't like a whole bunch of arguing. Like, I really don't like that. But like I said, I'm big on communication. You have to be somebody that can communicate. And I'm not even talking about like raising your voice. I'm talking about arguing. Okay. Arguing where y'all start throwing out offensive things, words that cannot be taken back, and just misunderstanding, not listening, over talking. I don't like that. That to me is like, that just does not set well with my spirit. I'm the type of person that would much rather have a conversation, and a real accountable conversation too, because a narcissist will twist that damn thing to twist that damn thing into something you'd be like, what are you talking about? That is not what happened at all. Like, they got this whole other reality going on inside of their head, and they're not being realistic, and they're not being honest with themselves. And now that all of a sudden they think they communicate, but really they just trying to win. And it's just crazy. Like, those types of things, like communication is a real big thing for me. So, if you're thinking about dating, before you're thinking about, stepping back out like that, ask yourself those questions, journal if you need to, meditate on it. Ask your ancestors and your spirit team to reveal to you what is it that they want you to know about that. Where's there areas for improvement? What do you need to watch out for? You know what I'm saying? Take your spirit team, your lineage. They would love to help you with those types of things. And it shows that you're going into dating on an intentional manner. Okay. You're not just going out here like, I'm lonely, I'm isolated, I'm finna pick this dude because he cute. You know what I'm saying? Because we all know that could that could be the the craziest one on the block. So, just intentionality is going to matter. And as divine feminine, embodied divine feminine, everything is intention. Everything is intention. Everything is checking in with spirit, checking in with ancestors, checking in with whatever your guides are, to see why we doing what we doing, and what we need to know and how we should be doing it. We don't just be doing stuff no more. All right. So step two is going to be clarify your standards. All right. So now you've got some intention behind it. You've checked yourself, where you are with your wounds, your patterns, what you do, what you don't want. Now we're going to clarify standards. All right. Not just preferences. Okay. So preferences are going to be things like height, career, lifestyle. I love a good chocolate brother, I want X amount of dollars. Those are preferences, and I used to do this all the time, and a lot of that came from going to some of those new age classes. And they was like, write a list of exactly the type of finances you want them to have. And I'd have this whole list of physical preferences, right? Like all these types of physicalities. And I wasn't hitting on like the spiritual like things that really mattered. And a lot of times I would attract these guys, right? Because I was trying to manifest back then. I was like, okay, you can manifest whatever you want, right? Like, bunk the heel and just get it. If like we can go into a grocery store and just pick it up and get it, and just it's gonna be all good after that. But I would get these guys that had a lot of what was on the list, and then they would be missing this one major thing. And I would be like, damn, I left that off the list, but that's important. you know and so I would start over with another list, and I would try to put that thing on, and the people would have the rest of the stuff, and they would be missing another thing, that was like, this is a big one right here. So the preferences, they cool. I mean, I think everybody has their preference. You know what your physical preference is like, and there's nothing wrong with that. But just make sure you're also putting things on there like standards, okay? Because standards are kind of like deal breakers, right? Like if a person doesn't have this, like I said, with the arguing thing and the whole miscommunication, those are standards for me. Like if it's bad like that, then I can't. It's a no for us, okay? And that's, wish you well, have a nice life. But standards are going to be things like emotional maturity. That's huge. That's a big one. You're going to want to have that. Integrity. That's a big one. You know what I'm saying? You somebody who does what they say, means what they say. They stand on that. They stand on business, right? Communication. Once again, that goes into emotional maturity. If you're an emotionally mature person and you thinking about something, and maybe it's something that I said that you rubbed you the wrong way, or maybe you took it a certain way, you can communicate that, and now it's like, oh, you know what? I didn't even think about it like that. I'm glad you said something. I'll be mindful now and how I approach you when it comes to that. That's grown. You know what I'm saying? That's emotional maturity, not getting mad and trying to, tit for tat and being competitive. Those are all schoolyard behaviors. Those are very immature behaviors. So, emotional maturity, communication, going to be a big one. Accountability. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes, everybody misses the mark. Okay. And a lot of times, those are opportunities to learn lessons. All right. So, being accountable, and a spiritual or personal growth. And this is where you really have to kind of use your own internal gauge on that. Like, I know for me, having as much spiritual depth as I have and understanding about things, and the fact that this is my purpose, I can't expect somebody to be on the same purpose as me, then I have to realize like not everybody's going to be um as spiritually developed as me, all right, especially as long as I've been doing it now. So my thing is a person doesn't have to necessarily be exactly where I'm at, but you got to have some growth, goals, whether that's personal development, because I do believe that personal development also leads into spiritual development as well, or some kind of spiritual development. You got to be developing yourself. You can't just be sitting there stagnant, totally comfortable with a 3D life. You know what I'm saying? For me, that's a standard, right? So a sovereign woman also does not compromise on standards because standards protect her future. And that's what I just said. I don't compromise on that arguing crap. Okay. Like, and I don't compromise on communication and I don't compromise on any of these really. Like, you have to have emotional maturity in order to be able to communicate properly. And in order for you to do that, you got to be accountable about what you do and don't do right. And you also have to have integrity, and you also have to have some sort of growth goals. And now here's the thing, I'm not just setting standards for people who that I don't have for myself and that I don't actually embody too. That's another thing too. So like if you're not actually haven't activated your divine feminine codes to that level, you can't really expect somebody else to come showing up ready with them type of standards and you don't have those standards for your own life. So that's also very important to understand as well. As you're going through your standards, you may say, hey, maybe I got some work on that to do. You know what I'm saying? And really start to gauge that, because throughout this process, it's going to be healing. It's going to be like the next frontier of healing. And that's why a lot of times people say, let's just say you do actually get in a damn relationship. Honey, it's going to be so much healing, like, to actually go through now with this other person that you have to partner with. All right. And so for people who have had healthy partnerships that have been long lasting, 40, 50 years, they'll tell you it's work. You know what I'm saying? It's work. Even though they had a healthy partnership, they had to work at it. You know what I'm saying? Because there was different ebbs and flows of it. All right. But for the purposes of this episode, we just talking about dating. We ain't talking about going all the way there. All right. So step 3 is going to be date with discernment, not fantasy. Ooh wee. Because this is huge. It really is. Discernment means watching, okay? So not just what we want, okay? Because like we can go from our preferences, okay? He a fine chocolate brother. He tall. He got a good job. You know what I'm saying? He clean. He got a nice car, etc. And he's got emotional maturity, and all of this. And this is what we want. This is our little wish list. We got here saved over here somewhere. Now we're actually going to be to the dating part. Now we need to make sure that when we're dating, we're using our discernment, which discernment means that we're using our spiritual radar. We're watching for things. We're watching for pink flags. We're watching for red flags, right? We're watching for green flags, we're watching. And then in order to do that, I think that dating is important because you get to know somebody, right? And it allows you to be able to watch the person in many different types of interactions and settings, right? So not just the present, how we put on the front, the first time, we dressed up all nice and smelling super good and looking all perfect and TikTok video ready, but over time, how is this person in different situations? How is this person when they done had a bad day at work? How's this person when somebody done pissed them off? Like I like to see people mad. Like I want to see you is mad as hell. So I know what that look like. Like that's me personally because I'm an Aries, I'm a fire sign. So I know depending on what it is, I don't get nearly as mad as I used to, but it's still in there. You know what I'm saying? Plus, it's a lot of the codes that I carry. You have to really, really do something. Or it has to really be something to take me to a point of passivity. But it's usually like quick spurts of fire, and it's not going to harm anybody, but still, a person needs to see that so that they don't get scared, because a lot of times it surprises people for the first time, because it's like, oh yeah, like and I'm like, oh yeah, that's me too. But when you're dating, you want to also have discernment, and you want to be watching for certain cues. Like I said, that consists of consistency, actions, how a person handles conflict, like I just said, how they treat other people. That's a big one. That really is a big one. You can learn a lot about a person about how they respect other people or don't respect other people. How do they treat the waiters and the waitresses? How do they treat the elderly? How do they treat people who may be waiting on them in some sort of a way? And I watch that. That's a big one for me. Like, if you disrespect people who are in service industries and stuff like that, that's a trigger for me, because to me that says a lot about the core of your being. And I think about that all the time, because I'm always respectful to service industry workers, because I appreciate what they doing. They people, they humans. I don't look at people like based on economical status, or all of these things that we do where we try to like separate souls in the human race, things like that. So I don't like that. So I pay attention to that kind of stuff. And a lot of times discernment, what I just said, watching behavior is different from fantasy, because fantasy is, oh, he looked good, and he got this going on, and he talk a good game, and all you're paying attention to is the front, right? You haven't actually gotten a chance to know them, to be able to watch over time what if they're consistent, what their actions are like, how they handle conflict, and how they treat other people. All right. So potential is imagination, but pattern is the truth. All right. Because over time you can't fake it. You end up being who you are. Your true self ends up showing, particularly the more comfortable you get with another person. That's how people end up telling you more stuff about them. They start telling you more things, and that kind of helps you to understand them a little bit better. One of the things that I like to ask people that I'm going to be close with is, like, I always like to ask their birth date, their horoscope. I like to know that, because a lot of times people are behaving exactly as they're supposed to behave. I could think that this person is really full of themselves. All they do is talk about them, and they think they're so great, but then they could be a Leo. You know what I'm saying? And that's Leos all day, or this person's just got full of energy. They're just, like this all the time. And, well, they could be an Aries, or this person's always like trying to help somebody and always trying to want to do this. And it seemed like that they could be a Cancer, so a lot of times just even knowing that for me is like, okay, it clicks and it makes sense. Like certain behavioral patterns about them, it'll be like, oh, yeah, well, this person's a so and so. Like me, for me personally, I don't fool with Geminis. I can't mess with y'all. I'm sorry. I can't. I can't. I cannot mess with Geminis. Okay, my experience with Geminis have been too crazy. All right, like each time it's not a good experience for me. So sorry, Geminis. So let's see. We talked about making sure that when you date, you're dating with discernment and not fantasy. Now we're going to go into the stop over functioning. We talked about that up in the top, but now this is one of the biggest the reason that women actually shrink. Because we start trying to do every damn thing. You're not allowing him to show you who he is. You know what I'm saying? You're trying to mold him and force him into being the preferences, you know what I'm saying? Well, really, he may just not be that. You know what I'm saying? That goes into that fantasy, to a certain degree. So what does over functioning actually look like? Planning every damn thing. All right. Emotional caretaking. That's a big problem. Really, it is. And then, that's mothering somebody, really. Teaching men how to show up, accepting inconsistency. It's okay. It's okay. No, it's not. That's shrinking. That's big time shrinking. And a lot of times, planning everything may not even seem like a big deal, right? It may seem like, well, that's what I like to do. I'm like the person that organizes things, and I like to plan everything. You need to allow this masculine to show up and, be an equal. You know what I'm saying? Allow him to plan some stuff. Allow him to be able to show you and prove to you that, you know, he's an equal. So don't plan everything. Allow him to take some initiative. Let him be the one taking initiative sometimes. Emotional caretaking. It's okay that he doesn't know how to communicate. It's okay. You're just gonna let it go because he get mad and stuff like that. This is shrinking. Okay, big time. And then teaching men how to show up. All right, you shouldn't be teaching. All right. A healed divine masculine that is an equal and ready to be with a divine feminine should not need no teaching. Okay. Like we're not teaching. That's somebody beneath you. Straight up. All right. Um, and then of course accepting the inconsistencies. Like that's a no. A divine feminine woman should receive and observe. Okay. She does not build the relationship by herself. And that's a big one. So you gotta allow, and a lot of times I think this can kind of be an issue if you have been single for a while. If you're used to taking care of shit and getting shit done all the time, particularly if you're a highly successful divine feminine, all right? Sometimes it is a trust factor for us to allow someone to come in and partner with us, right? Particularly if this guy is actually on your level or this partner's on your level, we got to allow him to show up. You know what I'm saying? We got to fall back a little bit into and rest in our divine feminine with a partner. Okay, not just like by ourselves, but with a partner. All right. So that one right there is probably one that a lot of people, if you are dating, or if you're about to start dating, that you can really kind of pay attention to because that can show up in a lot of different ways, right? All right, and so number 5 is gonna be let alignment filter the dating pool. This is uncomfortable. It really is because they'll be like, nope, nope, nope. The universe will be like, no, nope, no, almost, no, nah, that ain't gonna work. He got a wife, that kind of shit. So like, let alignment filter the dating pool, and so it's uncomfortable. But when you stop shrinking, the dating pool gets smaller, and that's just all there is to it. Once you start elevating, the dating pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But it's not failure, it's filtration. All right. So you're a sovereign woman, you would rather have fewer options and higher quality alignment than endless options with emotional chaos. And I think once we get to a certain age, we're kind of like, that's why we pull back a little bit and be like, okay, let me get my peace, let me get, less distractions and start moving internally, outwardly, and then we start to be more discerning, we start to be more choosy. It doesn't mean that no, you just have to be by yourself forever. It also means it matters where you're actually finding these people, okay? Because you're not going to find them in the club. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to find them, doing NPC stuff. You're going to find him being in some of those places, like I just talked about, somewhere where a person is working on themselves, or, they're going to be in a like mind type of place, right? So that matters too. So a sovereign woman would rather be alone and in peace than partnered in self-abandonment, and that's real. Okay, because if you've ever been in a relationship as a divine feminine where you've had to shrink, or you were on your way and you were more evolved and developed than your partner, it felt like self-abandonment. It felt like you were sabotaging yourself, and it felt like, yeah, you had a person, but you weren't whole in the inside. And that is not what we're trying to do, okay? Because the bottom line is the more that we begin to exhibit the standards that we have for other people, then the more we start to attract that. Because you better know a real divine masculine is looking for the same thing. Okay. He's not looking for a baddie. Not saying that you can't be divine feminine, spiritual, and a baddie too. But I'm just saying that he ain't just looking at that. You know what I'm saying? He's not just looking for the physicality. He's also looking for a divine feminine and a partner that embodies these. So if you continue to show up as you are and doing those things and readying yourself, the universe will align a proper match, and that's for sure. Okay. So now let's get to the fun part. You say, okay, now we know ain't nobody getting in no relationship. Right? You like, or at least not no time soon, because depending on where you live at, you may have to travel and shit. But now we want to talk about actually getting your needs met without shrinking, right? Because let's face it, like I said, divine feminine and sovereign women, we have needs too, honey. Not just sexual needs, but we have those too. But we have emotional needs, we have physical needs, intellectual needs, spiritual needs, okay? And the key here is going to be clear communication without apology. Say what you mean what you say. You don't have to be offensive and rude about it, but you should be able to be boundaried and confident in saying it, instead of, oh, I don't want to be difficult. That's not a divine feminine, period. Because sometimes I may have to say something to shake the shit up a little bit. It doesn't mean that it's, like I said, negative or offensive, but it may be something that actually kind of makes you introspective as hell and look at something and be like, ooh, particularly me being a mirror. Like everywhere I go, I make people look at parts of themselves. It's just part of my makeup and who I am, and it's and sometimes it's not comfortable. And so yeah, but there should be able to be some communication there, saying things that I'm looking for a partner who is emotionally available and consistent when you're making that list out. And the right man is going to lean in. Okay. The wrong man will get the hell on because he already know that's too much for me. Like I can go over here and get somebody, another NPC. There's plenty of them. You know what I'm saying? So the both outcomes are alignment. You just have to make sure that when you're getting your needs met, like I said, we're looking at all those things, like being honest about it. Like sex is just sex, okay? Sex is sex. I mean, if that's what we really wanted, then we just be out there going to do that. But as divine feminines, we also recognize once you done activated your codes to a certain point, you can't just be out there sharing energy with everybody. Like, like literally somebody come in there and suck your soul because they don't know. And you've got all this frequency and elevation. So no, we have to be very discerning when it comes to that. But that doesn't mean that we don't have emotional needs, okay? That doesn't mean that we don't want to feel desirable. The physical needs, the intellectual needs, me loving to have a conversation with somebody where we can really vibe and like be multidimensional with it, that's very important to me. I need a break from my corporate stuff and I need a break from being in the priestess role. And I just want to sit down and have a conversation and chop it up with somebody who can actually go from subject to subject with me and hold their own. I love that, right? Spiritual needs, where I can actually switch the conversation up from intellectual. Now let's get metaphysical. Let's talk about healing. Let's talk about ancestors. Let's talk about Black culture. All of those different things to me are all encompassing. I'm not running the person off. They're not lost in the conversation. They haven't gotten quiet and they haven't gone back to trying to shrink me and say that, oh, you you don't know everything, you need to be humble, then that's like, uh-oh, red flag for me, because I'm like, my bad, I thought that this was in alignment. You just showed me it wasn't, right? So just thinking about those things, like, still getting our needs met. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual all the time. It could just be one of those different areas being met that feel that for us. All right. Now I want to talk about the role of the divine masculine. All right. So we talked a lot about the divine feminine, and we talked about many different characteristics of what it is, how you can date, what you should be looking for, how to clarify your standards, make sure you're being discerning and not in fantasy, stop over functioning, making sure that there's alignment there, and getting your needs met without shrinking still, and also separating those out, so it's not just I need to, you know what I'm saying, like the physicality of it. You want to be able to you do that and some other things too, because that's going to fulfill you more than just the other. But the role of the divine masculine is just as important as the role of the divine feminine, and that also needs to be honored and respected. Now, quite naturally, I work with the divine feminines, and I work with women who are growing towards that. So I don't talk a lot about the divine masculine, but I did want to talk a little bit about that today, because the divine masculine and them being a counterpart to the divine feminine, is their job is to bring balance, okay? um their men are doing the work, right? And the men are also healing. Like I said, they're healing their father wounds, they're healing societal pressure that they have had to endure, emotional suppression that they've had to gotta be strong, you know what I'm saying? You can't show no weakness, you can't cry, all of this patriarchal construct. They are now starting to be able to heal those things, and release a lot of those the suppression, because a lot of that emotional immaturity, that's what that is, especially when you're dealing with somebody who, like I said, they don't know how to communicate. They just flip out and have a 5-year old tantrum. That's because of their emotions have been suppressed all the way to about whatever age they acted. Okay, so if they're acting like a 10-year-old boy, then chances are they started stuffing their emotions down at 10. And now you're looking at 45-year-old, 40-year-old man. And yeah, he don't know how to communicate. He doesn't know how to express himself because there's been no healing there. So these divine masculines have healed this, or are healing this, all right? And their job is to be the protectors. Okay, so when we talked about the protector and provider, that got really twisted up in the patriarchal construct of colonialism and capitalism, where we assumed that meant that you had to have the best job, that you had to buy her a house and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But when we take it from a spiritual perspective, if we talk about the divine feminine being the one who's the oracle, she's the intuitive one, she's the creative one. The divine masculine is the protector and provider of her. Okay, so what he's allowing her to do in the spiritual realm is he's allowing her to be safe to go ahead and do all of that. And if you want to take it from a metaphysical perspective, the divine feminine, she masters and governs and controls the spiritual realm. Okay, so that's going to be your oracle, that's your connection to your ancestors, your medium, your channel, the one who wakes up and knows what to do and then tells the divine masculine. Now, the divine masculine's role is he governs the conscious realm. Okay, so the subconscious and the conscious, right? And so the two of them partner together very well, because I can come and I can have this idea and it should be manifest, and I know which way we should do it and how we should do it. He's the one that actually brings it to form in the physical reality. So that's where the partnership comes from with the divine masculine and the divine feminine, because no one is higher or lower than the other. Okay, they both partner together and you need both, right? And that allows us to be able to have a full, well-rounded representation of partnership as well as community and family, right? So that's how we have gotten pulled away from that, those divine aspects of masculine and feminine, by being in a patriarchal construct where they say that men and the masculine is supposed to be on top and they're supposed to be rough and tough and don't cry and all of this stuff. And meanwhile, she's over here trying to fend for herself and do all of these different things. And she's not able to really rest in her divine feminine. So when a divine feminine meets a divine masculine who has done his work, who is healing, who has grown to a certain part, who knows how to exhibit healthy masculinity, not toxic masculinity, then she's able to rest. Okay. And so your spirit is going to feel that. Like you're going to feel safe. When we talk about that protection, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about your spirit feeling safe and at ease. But if a divine feminine does not feel that, then we're going to still be keeping our masculine up. Okay. Like we're going to still have to keep our masculine up, because why? Because we need protection. We don't know if we could trust you yet. And so that takes time. Okay. But I just definitely wanted to touch on that for a little bit, because the role of the divine masculine is absolutely important. It is very valuable. It is valid. It is appreciated. It is honored just as much as the divine feminine. All right. But like I said, and the only person that can really partner with a divine feminine is a divine masculine, right? Because he understands his role. There's no competition. He knows what he needs to do. And that's why it's important on the divine feminine side to not be over functioning, right? Because when we're over functioning like that with a divine masculine, now all of a sudden you're stepping on his toes. You're stepping on his purpose and what it is that he's supposed to be doing too. You know what I'm saying? Allow him to be that divine masculine, because that's a turnoff if you ever get one, to them as well. All right. So yeah, so this right here, this has been a powerful episode, ladies, and I hope that y'all really enjoyed this. It's a little different than what we usually do. I definitely always appreciate y'all's comments down in the comment section. And then let's see what else we got going on. Just check me out, y'all. I've been so busy. I got so much stuff going on. Like there's some other amazing things going on inside of my world, and I'm just loving what's happening right now. But definitely make sure you're following me. Check out the website holisticandspiritualaf.com. It'll have the classes over there, how to sign up for the newsletter. That's a great way to get in touch with me on social media. Of course, you can follow me at holistic and spiritual af. And y'all, that is it until the next episode. Peace.